Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, man, we can hear you.
Okay, so today we are going to look into the classes and objects in Java. So during these sessions, we won't be able to learn everything about classes and objects. I'm being honest, so we'll be covering most of the parts related to the coursework, and that would be enough to complete the coursework. So that's what we are trying to do. So let's get into it. So first of all, we had to understand what's a class. So class is like a blueprint which we use to create objects. So y'all might know. Um, so normally, before we build a house, we'll be having a blueprint, right? So that blueprint would be saying like um, the structure of the house or where the house should be, like the doors and rooms, etc. like that. So this would be our blueprint, and using this blueprint we can build a house, right? So maybe if I want, I can build a house in a land in Pamlapetia, and using the same blueprint I can build another house in another area. So the same blueprint can be used multiple times to build different houses in different places like that. So this blueprint is similar to class, and these houses which we build are similar to objects. So yeah. So classes is a term that describes a group or collection of objects with common properties. In the same way, the blueprint exists before any houses are built. Hmm. Yeah. The next thing we have to say is when it comes to a class, there's two important things. So when it comes to a class, we have two important things. One is attributes, and then we have something else called methods. So attributes are like the properties of a object, and methods are what that object can do. For example, if we take human, so we can take humans. So when it comes to programming, first of all, everything is recognized as an object. For example, you as well as me, it's treated as an object for a programming language. So if we think of a general class for someone like me, it would be humans, right? So we say humans in a general term, right? So when it comes to humans, a human can have a name, a human can have an age, and it's going to be unique for everyone. For example, my name is Akzant and my age is 19, where it differs for you. So likewise, a human can also have different behaviors. For example, I can talk, I can eat, and there's more. Likewise, object also has something called attributes and methods, and these can differ from one object to another. Okay. And guys, if you have any doubts, you can ask me. So what we say, well, so when you look into this example, you can see these houses are like a specific instance of a class. So this is going to be a unique one, as well as this one is going to be a unique one. These both are like different, not the same house. Likewise, we can have so many objects using the same blueprint. That's what I'm trying to say. Using one on Blueprint, you can create around thousands of objects. So how do we create a class? That's the first thing we have to know. So to create a class file, you can simply go to your IntelliJ and then you can click over here. So if you normally we'll be having two files, right? Normally when we create a Java project, we'll be having this main folder, main method. So if you want to create a So if you want to create another class, what you'll do is simply right click on this folder and then you press new and then you can create a new Java class. So you have to give the name. Normally when we name a class, the first letter used to be capital. That's like a good core of practice. That's how we do in Java. And then we say, so when you create this, by default it says public class cat. So after creating the classes, you can add your attributes and methods in it. So this is simply how you create a class file. And when we go further, we'll be looking into everything one by one. So the first thing what you have to do is create a new file, Java file with the class name, and then create a public class with the same file name, and then add the attributes and methods to it. So here's an example, public class cat, and it has some attributes like color and red, and it also has some methods. So the next thing, so variables. So what I mean by variables is the properties. So there are three types of variables. One is local variable, instance variable, and class variable. So local variable. So we have done Python, right? In Python, we used to create a function, and if we add anything inside the parameters, which means the bracket or the parenthesis, it's considered as a local variable, right? Which means, I mean, try to show. So in Python, we say if, and we say the function name, and then inside this we write the parameters, right? So these parameters are considered as a local variable inside this block of code, like whatever you do inside this function, right? The same way, in Java also, whatever you write, whatever the variables you initialize inside your methods would be a local variable. So they would be only be able to access it inside your methods, not outside your methods. So a variable declared inside your class, methods or constructor is called as the local variables. Other methods in the class are not aware of these variables. So for example, let's say you have two different methods. So this will be method one. I'm just commenting it for now. I'm not going to write the methods and stuff now. So likewise, let's say we have two methods. So if I create a local variable in method one, and that variable would be only be able to access it inside the method one. The method two won't be able to read that variable or access that variable. So that's about the local variable. The next thing is instance variable. So an instance variable is simply any variables which you define inside your class. So you all know this is our class. So any variables which you define inside the class outside the methods. So we'll be having multiple methods, and when you define a variable outside your method, it's going to be your instance variable. So this variable declared inside the class but outside any methods or constructors is known as an instance variable. And this variable can be shared among multiple methods, which means, so let's say if I create a string name, so I'm creating a variable called string name, So I can use this variable inside my classes, like I can use it inside my multiple classes and stuff. So that's how you create an instance variable. And then we have something called class variable. So first of all, let's try creating a local variable and an instance variable. So for now, I'm just going to say I'm going to create a method saying um just to check, right? Print. So I'm going to create a method called print. So this thing is going to take a parameter from the user, a string parameter from the user called n, and then when I try to print it out inside our same method, it's going to work. But if I have another method, print, so there's just one word different in it. So when I try to print the same thing, which is inside, which was initialized inside our print method, it won't be recognizing it inside this method because this is a different method and this is another different method. So you all can see it throws the error here itself. So it says cannot resolve the symbol n. Okay, so that's the local variable part. So comment this part. So the next thing is instance variable. So I told you an instance variable can be accessed inside our classes. Uh, sorry, instance variable should be declared inside the class and outside the method. So look, we are declaring this variable inside our class and it's outside the method. It's not inside a method, right? So if I try to create another method, saying public void string new maybe, and if I try to the name, print the name, now say it doesn't throw any errors because it can access these variable called instance variable. It becomes it acts like a global variable. So a global variable can be accessed in all the functions right in Python. Likewise, it acts like a global variable here. And then we have something else called class variables. A class variable is declared inside a class using a keyword called static. So let's try what happens if we do this. First of all, let's try to run this and see what happens. So first of all, we had to create an object out of cap. I'll be explaining you how to create this object, but for now, let's keep it. Okay, now I'm going to create an object called feature. For now, forget this syntax. We'll be going through it one by one. I'm going to say feature. So see, I can assign values to it. And then can I try to call the method which we did? So what's the method name? It's print name. Print name. And then I execute this. You all will be able to see the output. And likewise, if I implement this, and I try to run this, let me go to print. So we had this browser string here. And when I try to call to the print, the second method which we created prints. So I try to do this, see it throws a error saying that symbol variable n is not reachable. So this is known as a local variable, this part. So when you declare a variable inside your parameters, it's going to be local for this block of code. It won't be reachable outside this block of code. So that's all you all have to remember for now. And the next thing is class variable. So I told you a class variable, how you create a class variable is when you use a static keyword for your instance variable, it's going to be a class variable. And what's unique in this class variable is it's going to um, assign the same value for your multiple objects. For example, um, let's do it without a class. Okay, let's do this. Let the name be a normal variable or instance variable, and let's try to create another variable called in started in number of let's okay. So let me create another object like this, a cat object. So the first object is obj and the second object is obj1, and I'm going to say my second object's name is going to be or name is going to be um randomly something plus x1, and we're not going to use these methods, so let me comment this off, and we are going to print the name plus the number of foots. the, this is what we're trying to do. So let's remove this part. So when it comes to a classic static variable, to assign the values, we can use the class name itself. So our class name here is cat. So if I say cat dot number of legs, it's going to assign the value. So when I click number of legs, I can assign the value through this. So the normal way of assigning values would be you use your object reference and then you say which variable you want to assign to. But here we can assign it using the class name itself, and the value is going to be shared to both of these objects such as obj and obj1. So when I say obj print name as well as obj1 dot print name, it's gonna print string values. So see, it says the name, and both of them have this number of legs variable shared, which means both of them having the same values. So later on, if I change this value using an object reference, it's gonna affect everything. So for example, if I use the object reference which we gave obj and try to change this number of it's starting, so how to use this. Yeah, so if I change this, it's going to be shared once again. So see, both of them are sharing. So it doesn't matter how many objects you have. If it's a static variable, the value is going to be shared among all these objects. So you can't do this for the name because name is not static. When I try to say cat.name, see it throws error. It shows invalid, which means it says a non-static file name cannot be referred from a static context. So only a static variable can be shared like this. So I can have a look at this. So that's about local variable, instance variable, and the class variable. If you all have any doubts, can you all ask it now itself? Do you all have any doubts first of all? Anyone? class variables. Yeah. Okay. You want me to explain class variables again? Okay. So a class variable is a variable, instance variable with a static keyword. Okay. So when you create a class variable, it would be shared among all your objects. So if I try, I can show you. So here we have a class called cat, right? So our class is cat, and it has two attributes such as name and then number of legs. Number of legs. And this this attribute is static, which means it's a class variable. So what happens is when we create objects, for example, let's say cat1, and we have two objects here, cat2. So when we create these objects, the name is going to be unit. So you'll be giving the name, so it's going to be unit. So let's say name is going to be for the cat font, Kelly or something, and this can be Kelly likewise. But when it comes to the number of legs, it's going to be shared among these two. Both of these classes are going to share the same value for this variable within these two objects. Is it clear or else is it still can you understand it, Niju?
Yes.
All right. So the next thing is how do we create methods? So when you create a method, so this is simply what the method is. So here he had two methods over here. So one method which is to print it. So first we had to okay, let's do it from the first. So when we type public, it defines the access modifiers. So at the moment we won't be studying about access modifiers, and then after typing the access modifiers, we'll be saying the return type. So I'm going to create a function which is just going to print some values inside it, which means it's not going to return anything, right? It's just printed. So if it's not going to return anything, you will be using a return type called void. So if you're returning something else, so if you're returning something, then you can use the other data types such as mm, string, integer, bool, and etc. But if you're not returning anything, then you'll be using data called void. Okay. So since I'm going to just um, print the value, I'm not going to return anything. So I'm going to say void. After that, we say the method name. So it's going to be print info. In my case, it's just the name I get. It can be anything. So afterwards, we use a parenthesis and use a curly brackets. So this is how you create a method. And within the parenthesis, we can initialize parameters. And since it's JavaScript, it's a statically typed language, you have to say the data type of your parameters which you're receiving. So for example, if I'm going to get the if I'm going to get some sentence from the user and print that, I have to say, so the sentence is going to be a string, right? I'm going to say string sentence or something like that. So this is our variable, and I have to say the data type of the variable inside the parenthesis itself. So we learned how to um, how to indicate the return type, how to name the method, and what are the how to declare a parameter. So afterwards, it's your method body. So this is your method body, and you can perform whatever the actions you want inside this part. So in this example, let's try just printing whatever the user gets. So you all know this variable would be a local variable, which means it would be only able we would be only able to use this variable inside this method. It's not accessible outside this method. So let's try calling this method. I'm going to delete all of this. I'm going to say I'm going to use the reference name and call the method called print info. So see, without passing an argument, it's going to throw you an error. So see, when I over this, it says expected one argument but found zero. So I had to send something. So I'm going to say hello world, and when I run it, it prints it. Okay. So let's try to create something which is going to return something as well. So in this case, I know this class name and this thing doesn't make sense, but let's think we have a method called add, and it's gonna take two parameters such as a comma int b. It has two variables, integer variables taking as parameters such as a and b, and then it's going to return us the sum. Okay, I'm going to say since it's going to return us, and you know when you do addition with integers, the sum is going to be an integer type, right? So what you're returning is going to be a integer type again. So I say it like this, and simply what I could do is I could perform a action inside. I could say int sum equals a plus b, and then I could return it, return sum. So I could do this. So what happens if I don't put this return keyword? So see, when I don't use a return keyword, it says missing return statement. The reason is you have mentioned here your method is going to return something in integer type. And after mentioning it, if you don't return anything, it's going to throw you an error. So we had to return something in integer type, data type. So let's try calling this method. Mm, So it's going to return something, right? So when it returns something, you have to again accept whatever the value it returns. So let's say I'm going to just print what it returns. Mm, so I'm going to call this method obj.add, and we have to pass two integer values. I'm going to say 2, comma 3. Okay. So when I run this, it will be printing 5. So you all can see it's returning 5, and we are printing it out. So rather than printing it, you could also assign it to a variable and then print it. So simply it's going to be like in some output, maybe output equals to, you can cut this part, it's, and then we can say print output. So this also gives the same output. That's it, and it's the same output. So yeah, let's come here. So first we had to declare the return type, the data type of the variable returned by the method. So after that we say the method name, and this is the parameters, and this is the body, whatever the action you're going to perform. So the next thing which we are going to learn is how to create a object, or what is an object. So as I told you in the previous thing, object is a specific instance, or we say it's like a concrete instance of a class, which means if you take, let's take a class like this. Let's take a class called humans. So human is a generalized term which we can use on anyone, right? I'm a human as well as you. Everyone is a human. So let's take a class called human, and a human, anyone would be having a name, right? and they a human can have a attribute called age as well. So this is our class, and using this there can be multiple humans. For example, I told you all in programming, a program sees a person like an object, which means if this is me, really bad drawing. So if this is me, I am also an object. So if it's me, I'm also treated as an object according to program, as well as if we have someone else, they are also treated as an object. Likewise, there can be hundreds and thousands of objects. There's no limitation to that. 19, the age can be 20. Likewise, we can have multiple. So when we look at an object, it is only like one single instance of this class called human. If you take me, I'm just one single instance of the class called human. Likewise, there can be multiple instances. That's what I'm trying to write. So how do we create a object in Java? So that's what we are going to see. So let's try to create. First of all, let's use the same class which we are using in the example. Let's try to create a class called human, and then let's say string name, and then integer age as our attributes, and let's try to create it. So if I say all something, so you all have created objects already. So you all might have used this scanner class, right? Import. So previously you all might have used Java class. So how do you all say it? Like how do you all use this scan object? Or say scanner, and you all give some reference name, or maybe normally you give it as scan, right? Equals new scan. So let me explain this part first. System. So when you take this line and if we break it into small pieces, it looks something like this. The first thing which you mention here is known as the class name. So what we mention here as scanner is also a class name. So when I control and click into it, it opens the scanner.java class, and you all can see that it has so many methods inside it. Okay. So the first thing we mention is the class name, and then what we mention is a reference name which we give for this object. So at this point, it might be confusing, but just think like it's just a reference name how you uh, call your object. So in this case, I can say my reference name for this object is Akshay, and for this object is John. Likewise, you all can give any reference name for any objects. So the second one is going to be a reference name. Spaces afterwards. So this is the declaration part, and then we initialize it. So how do we initialize it? We say equals, and then we use a keyword called new. So this keyword is kind of important, and there's no other ways than using this keyword. So after mentioning this keyword, um, after mentioning this keyword, you mention something called constructor. So at this point, y'all might not understand what is a what constructor means, but simply think a constructor is something like this. So a constructor is something like class name, class name with a parenthesis. So y'all can see we had the class name scanner with parenthesis, and then we are passing something inside called system in as arguments. Okay. So is there any doubt in this part? Like how do we create an object here? No, right? So let's try to create a few objects of human. So I'm going to say human, and let's give a reference of Akshay equals new human. So this is how you create an object. So after creating this, you'll be able to access all the So when you create the object, afterwards you'll be able to access this variable using that reference name which you gave. So when I say outside dot, so when I say outside dot, you can see you can access both of these variables, right? So that's what I mean. So likewise, you can create multiple objects using this with different reference name. See, and likewise, you all can create multiple objects. So that's simply how you create objects. And once you create the objects, you all can assign name for each of these objects. So let me show you. So I can say the object which you create, the reference name on say dot name is equals to. Likewise, you all can do it. So by default, so what happens if you don't refer, I mean, if you don't assign a value, and if you try to print, let's say we have a method called print info. Like, so what you all think? Uh, what gets print here when we don't assign values for the object, and when we just try to call these methods? Any idea? What I'm trying to say is, if I say John dot print info, what happens? Anyone? It's so boring when no one replies. Okay, no one's bothered to reply. Yeah, print the address. Well, I'm not printing the object. I'm using a method called print info, which is a method inside the human class, and that method is just printing the name and the age. So what's happening here is we didn't define the values for name and age. So do you think it's going to print the address or it's going to print the default values? Okay, wait, first thing. Do you all know what are the default values for string? A string variable and a integer variable? Yes or no? Anyone? I had comments. Yeah, default values. Yes. I'm asking what are the default values for string and integers. Yes, so by default, string has null and integer has 0. So when you don't assign values and when you try to access this method, it's going to print null and 0. But if you assign values for this object, and then you assign age, something like this, and when you run the same method, it's going to print John 40. So by default, if you don't assign any values for these variables, it's going to print the default values of those data types. Okay, so remember it, it might be useful. So you all know what's object now. Object is an instance of a class, and how you create object is by saying the class name, reference name, and you use a new keyword and then constructor. So still, you all might not have an idea about what is a constructor. Simply think it's not exactly a method, but it's something like a method. Okay? So yeah, here you all can have a better view of a class and object. So you all can see, let's say we have a class called dog with name, age, grade, and vaccine status. So this is just an example, okay? So if we have something like that, a class called dog, and with the variables called name, age, breed, and vaccines, our objects would be like, let's say we create three objects. So these are unique instance of this class. So if you take this object, this is a unique instance, and this object has different values for each of these variables, and this one has different objects for each of these variables likewise. So you all can see the first dog has the name of stranger, second one Roxy, and third one browser. So likewise, we can assign different values for each of the objects you create, and they are going to represent some unique single instance. So alright, so that's about the object and instances. So now we tried how to create a class. So I can give you all like 5 minutes. Try to create a class cat with color, name, gender as the variables, so attributes, and like just create some blank methods like drink milk or play, something like that. Make sure you all create another variable called legs, and it should be shared among all the objects. Afterwards, create like two objects and try check if it works for you. I'll give you all like 2 minutes since we don't have enough time. I think that's enough of time. Your methods are empty methods, so you all can create it. So your output should look something similar to this. So we created 4 variables like color, name, gender, and legs. So your leg should be a um, static type because it's a class variable. We told this is going to be shared among all your objects, and then we have two methods which does nothing at this moment. I just created the methods. Okay, so this was the work, and if you all had done it, it's good, and you all can try creating objects out of it and try checking if they work properly. Okay. So the next important thing, what is getters and setters? In Java, we have something called getters and setters. So first of all, we are gonna learn the long way of how to create a getter and setter, and later on in IntelliJ we have an easier way to generate getters and setters. So we'll be looking into all of those. So what is a getter? Um, so a getter and setter are just some Java methods used to retrieve or modify the value of classes private variables. So at this moment, you all don't know what is a private variable as well. So private variable is a concept of encapsulation, which means it is to make sure the sensitive data are handled carefully and hidden from the users. Users in a sense, external users. So how do you make a variable private? How do you make it like hidden or like how do you hide it from the other users? Simply when you declare the class variables or the attributes, you add a keyword called private in front of them. So if you do that, your variable would be only able to, the variable which you made as private will be accessible only inside your class. So let's try doing this with the name variable. So y'all might think, when are we going to use these private keywords and encapsulations and stuff? So normally when it comes to when it comes to any program which handles user data, it's recommended to use private methods or encapsulated. The reason is we are handling others' information and we shouldn't make our program like accessible for others to wave someone third person's information, right? So yeah, that's why we use something called encapsulation. So let me show you how to make a variable private. So like I told y'all, y'all just have to add the keyword called private in front of the variable you declare. So once you're done with this, so soon as I change it to private, you all can see something happens here. When I try to assign the value for the name using the reference, it throws an error. It says the field name has a private access in human, which means the name variable will only be able to accessible inside this class called humans. You won't be able to access it or like modify it inside any other classes. So you all can say this is our human class and this is our main class. So this is a different class, right? So you won't be able to access the private variables inside a different class. So that's what they mean. So we won't be able to do this. So yeah, I had to erase it. So the only way you can assign values to your private variables would be getters and setters. And that's why we had to know what is a getter and setter. So like the name says, getter or get, we call it like get method or get method. So get method is simply going to return you something or return something what you ask for, and a set method is going to set the value set the value for the variable value for the variable. So how do we create an getter and setter? So getters and setters are, again, it's like a method. It's simply a method. It's just we give the name getters and setters because they only have one function. Like get, if we use a get method, it's going to return you something, and set method is going to assign the value. So first of all, let's see how to use a set method. So we all had to um, think. So when it comes to a set method, are we going to return anything? That's the first question. Are we going to return anything using this method? No, right? we are just going to set the values. So what is going to be the data type of this, sorry, what is going to be the return type for this method? Any ideas? You can talk.
Void.
Yep, void. Since we are not returning anything, it's going to go void. And then we had to say the name of this method, right? So normally, as a good code of practice, how we name the getters and setters is by saying get and the variable name which you're going to assign the value to. So in this case, I'm going to assign the value to our name variable. So I'm going to say get name, and then within parentheses what we have to do is, so what we are trying to do is we are going to take a input or a argument from the user and assign that value to this variable. So I'm going to say string. So if you're getting a argument, you have to receive it from this side, which means we have to initialize a parameter. That's what I'm saying. So I'm going to say string n, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say name variable is equals to n. Okay, so by using this method you can assign variables to your objects which has private fields. So you all can see I have something called get name, and using this I can set the name for my object. Okay, likewise, a set method. So let me explain getters and setters so I can show you the example. So you all know a say oh, fish. I confused it. Get method it should be set, not get. I'm setting the value. Sorry, it's my fault. So what you were discussing is set, not a get. So a getter is simply going to return you something. So that's why we call it get. So if it's going to return something, you have to know what data type it's going to return, right? So in this case, if we are returning our private variable called name, its data type is string, right? So we have to say public string because the return type is string. And then again the same naming conventional, you say get and you say name. So this method is not going to take any parameters because we are not taking anything. We are just trying to like return the value of the variable. So simply what we do inside this is return name. So this is simply how you create getters and setters. So y'all can say, y'all can ask if we should use the same names like set name and get name. No, it's not compulsory to use it, but as a code of practice and like the way in how we define getters and setters is by using the key by using the words called set and get. And even if you change the name and if you call it, it's the function is going to work. But let's say another person is going to review your code and he would be wondering what you're trying to do inside this place. So that's why we use set and get names. Okay, so first I assign values for this, and then let me try printing. So you all know simply when I say when, so you all know the get name is going to return your name, which is a string type. So you all have to receive it from this end, right? So I'm going to create a string variable called a, and then call this method on say dot get name. So let's try executing this, and I'm going to say print hey. So when I run this, you all will be able to see Oxen. So this is printing it from this place. Okay. So this is simply how getters and setters work. And again, we'll be learning more about this after we learn what is a constructor. So all you have to know now is two things. One is when you create a private variable, you can access that variable only inside the same class. you can't access the variable outside the class. So if you try to access this name outside this class using the reference, like which we did previously. So previously we were trying to say the reference name, and then we were trying to access this variable, right? But now if I try to access it, it's not like Python doesn't sorry, Java doesn't recognize it. But when I as soon as I remove this keyword called private, and when I try to do it, now it it shows in the suggestion itself. So now so you can access it. But soon as I make it private, you won't be able to access it. See, see, you can't see that variable called name, but you can see age. So that's uh, that's what it means by encapsulation. And getters and setters are simply methods in Java used to do two single tasks. A getter would be simply returning the variable which you're requesting for. In that case, you all had to create methods for each of your, you all had to create your own getters and setters for each and every private variables in your class. And your getters will be returning that variable, and setters are going to assign the value for that variable. So I told you all in IntelliJ, there's not in IntelliJ, even in Visual Studio Code, there are easy way to create this. And okay, I'm not going to spoil you all now. Let's learn constructors first. So yeah, let's go into the first next part, and then I'll say how to do it. So the next thing is constructors. So we learned about constructors when we were discussing how to create an object. So you all know when to create an object, you all had to say the class name and then the reference name. You say a equal sign and then you use a new keyword, and then we use something called constructor. So now let's look what is a constructor. A constructor is a block of code defined inside the class that initialize a newly created object. So simply, a constructor is another method which runs whenever you create an object. It runs automatically. You don't have to call it, but it runs automatically. So you all can read this and you all can get a small idea. But before that, let me try to create a constructor. Mm, So constructor is similar to a method, but it's not a method. So how do you create a constructor? Again, to create a constructor, your constructor will be always your class name. It should be exactly what your class name is. So you just say human and then you open parenthesis and listen. So by default, when you don't, wait, uh, this is problem. Okay. So by default, every program, so even this thing, we have a constructor, right? But we didn't initialize this part previously. So even though we initialize or not, this would be done by Java in the backend itself. So by default, there would be a constructor, empty constructor, which does nothing inside this block. Okay. So when I run this code, again, it's going to be the same thing. There's no difference in it. So what can a constructor do? Let me show you. So I'm just going to say hello from the constructor. So I told you all constructor. So I told you a constructor runs whenever you create an object, right? So let's say, so at this part, I'm just creating one object called object. I'm not even assigning the properties or the attributes values for this object. I'm just creating this object. And when I run this, you all can see it prints hello from the constructor, which means it's calling the constructor by default. So why do we use constructor? So normally we use constructor if you want to do something when you create a object. For example, as soon as you create an object, if you want to print something, or else if you want to assign values to the variable in a single way. So let me say, okay, let me create this. So at till this point, we learned something called getters and setters. So setters are simply going to assign values to your private variables, right? And let's say in your program you have multiple private variables, like not just one but two or three private variables. So to so if you want to assign values, or if you want to return the same value, then you need to create multiple getters and setters, and then again for each of them you have to like call them, right? So when you call them, it's gonna take like few lines for that as well. So let me soon create this integer, and I have to say age is going to be age equals n. Likewise, for each and every private variables which you create, you have to create a getter and setter, right? So again, when you use it, it's going to be a headache, because let's say if I want to set my name and age, so I had to use two lines. I had to say argz dot set name, and again if I want to set the age, since age is also a private variable now, so you all can see I use the private keyword, so we would be only able to access it through a method. So I had to say argz dot set age equals okay. Likewise, so you all can see when we have more private variables, you have to like your line of code increases, right? So to decrease it, can we do something else? And the answer is yes, using a constructor. So using a constructor, again, you all can pass something like arguments inside this constructor. So you all might have seen it when we created scanner class. You're passing something, right? This is an argument. Simply like when you send something, when you call your function is known as arguments, right? So when you send something, it can be called as argument. So I can send argc slash 90, which is my age. So when you send arguments from the other side, we had to receive it, right? Which means we had to mention it as parameters here. So I can say string. So the first thing which we receive is the name. So I'm going to say n, and then what we receive is known as is age. So I can get it, and then I can assign the values to our name and age variables. So I can say name equals n and age equals 8. So by doing this, I can reduce two lines of code. Like previously we had something like this, right? So at this point, I don't need two of them because it's going to assign the values soon as it creates the object itself. So if you all don't believe me, let me try calling this print info after creating this object. So I'm going to say object say dot print info. So when I call this and when I run this in the console, you all can see my name and my age. So this is why we mainly use constructor. So this is how you all create a constructor, and now you all need to know something new, which is known as a keyword called this. So y'all might have be wondering, why can't we give the same name? Like same name means like the same variable names. So for the name, can't I give something like name? And for the age, can't I give something like age? And then say name equals name and age equals age. So this is where your local variables fights with the instance variable. So you all know when you create a um, parameter, it's going to act like a local variable inside this block of code, right? I told you all in the beginning itself when we learned about local variables. So let's recap a bit. So a local variable is a variable declared inside a class method or a constructor, and it's going to work as a local method, local variable inside your method. Which means what you're trying to do here is you're getting this variable called name and again assigning it, which means it doesn't make sense. Simply like it's going to take, let's say my name is A, then it's going to assign A to A. It doesn't make sense, and this is what it's doing. So how do I say I'm referring this to this name variable and this age variable to the instance variable which we created here as the age. So for that we use something called this. So you all might be wondering what keyword this does is. So this keyword refers to the current object or the current object's instance variable. I created a slide. Yes. So this object refers to the current object's instance variable. The most common use of this keyword is to eliminate the confusion between class attributes and the parameters with the same name, because a class name attribute is shadowed by a method or the constructor's parameter. So y'all can let me show how it works. So let me try this. So now we have it as name equals name and age equals age, and I'm gonna run this and let's see what's the value, what's the output you get. So you see you get the default values for the string and age, right? You get null and then it prints 0 because it's not assigning the value which you pass to these variables. So how do we do this? We simply say, so what happens in a assignment operator? It's going to assign the value in the right side to the left side variable, right? So it's going to take this value and assign it to the left side variable. So I'm going to say assign it to this dot name. So what this keyword does is simply refers to the instance variable which you have inside your class. So soon as I mention this dot name and this dot age, and when I run this code, you all can see it works perfectly. So if you all don't understand what this keyword does, please ask me now. This is kind of important because when you create get and setters, you don't give a random name for your parameters. You all have to create your parameter names has to be something understandable by others also. So we use name equals name likewise. Okay. So if you all don't understand it, please ask it now itself. I'll explain it again. This keyword refers to the current object's instance variable. So you all know what we are trying to do here at this part is take the value in the right side and assign it to the left hand side variable, right? That's what we are trying to do. For example, let's say you have a variable called a equals 5. So the value of this variable is 5 and you're trying to assign this value to the left hand side variable name, which is 8. So that's what we are trying to do here also. We are trying to assign this name which is received from the user as an argument to the variable called name, but we are actually trying to call this variable which is an instance variable. But since when you create a variable with the same name inside your local inside your method, which refers to as a local variable, it doesn't count the instance variable. It tries to give the priority to the local variable itself. So to ignore that, you use a keyword called this. So if y'all still don't understand it, simply try to remember it like when you use this keyword in front of the variable, it refers to the instance variable of that class. That's the easiest way you can remember this keyword. Okay. So this is how you create a constructor, and this is how you create your getters and setters. So y'all might wonder, why do we need a constructor as well as a getter and setter? So yeah, in a complex application, there are different tasks which we do. For example, we can create, I mean, when we create the method itself, we can say assign the values for the variables, and later on think if we want to like access this age variable and do some calculations and stuff. In that case, we might need the getters, right? Like get age to get the value of the age and do some calculations. So that's why we have getters and setters. And in our coursework, they have uh, they have mentioned us to create getters and setters. So make sure you all create the getters and setters. So let's try to, okay, let me say how to create getters and setters in the simplest way. So the easiest way to create getters and setters in IntelliJ is right click, and then there's something called generate, or else you can use the shortcut alt plus insert. So you click generate, and then to get a getters and setters, you can see you'll have so many options. Like you all can generate a constructor, or else if you all only want a getter, you all can do that, or else setter you can do that, or else if you all want both getters and setters, you all can do that. And then you all have to select both of this, and then click OK. So see, it does the same thing what we did. So get name is going to return the string, and the set name is going to get a parameter from the user and assign that variable to the instance variable. The same thing is done by the get age and set age. So look at this name. So it says get and the variable name in camel case. Okay. So that's how it's done. So if I click generate a constructor, and it's going to be the same. So you all can select what are the parameters you all want to take. So see, it takes the string name, integer name, and then assigns it to the variables. So this is how you create getters, setters, and constructors in your program, and it works perfectly. Okay, the next important thing. So what's the next okay, the next thing is commenting conventional. So according to our coursework, there's a specific way they expect us to comment, and if you don't do it, y'all might lose some marks. So I thought of including this also. So whenever we write a method, we have to comment its behavior. So it's not something hard. It's really easy. It's just you have to mention three things as comment. The first thing you mention is the purpose of that method. So let's say you have a method like add, which we had previously. So add method takes two inputs, adds it, sums it up, and returns it, right? So what is the purpose of this method? The purpose of this method is to add two numbers paths through the parameters. So that's what we are trying to do. And then in the second line, you all had to mention what are the parameters or the meanings of them. So simply, if I say int a and int b, they won't be able to understand, right? So you all had to say integer variables a comma b. And then in the third line, you all mention the return value or the return type. So you all say return type is an integer and it's the sum of variables a and b. So this is simply how you all commit it. So y'all might have seen this in your lecture slides itself. This is not a big part, so let me try commenting. Let's try commenting. So we don't have any method which has a return type as well as a parameter. Okay, let's try commenting this one. So we all use a multi-line comment for this. Oh, shit. So the first thing we all had to say what this method does. So you all know this method is going to set the value for the name variable. So this method assigns the value for name variable. So that's the purpose of this method. And the second thing we had to mention about the parameter which we take. So before mentioning the parameter, we use something. This is known as annotations in Java. So this is not something compulsory, but this is a good code of practice. So you say add, and then you say params. So that's how you say parameters. So that's how you simply say parameters in Java. Say params, and you say string name, string name. So what we are taking from the user is a string, and it's a name from the user, right? User's name, maybe something like this. And in the third line, we say what is the return type. So in this method, the return type is void, which means it's going to return nothing. So you can mention it, but it's not necessary if it's nothing. Returns nothing. So this is how you comment in Java. So this is something important and mainly not for the getters and setters, but for the other methods. So in our Java course, we have so many methods like buy seeds and etc. So for those methods, you all have to use your comments and say what is the purpose, what are the parameters you all take, and what are the return types you all have, if it has any return types. So that's all about it. And the next thing, let's try try to create multiple objects. I think that's the next topic. Yes. So the next thing which we are going to learn is object arrays. So we didn't have the array session till now. So is there anyone who doesn't know how to create a array, like a normal integer array or something? I hope everyone knows how to create an array. So let's say in our program we are going to create multiple objects like this. Shit. This control C. So for each of them, I had to give some input John. So all of them are going to have some unique vari values and stuffs. Okay. So here we are creating four objects like John, Hafsa, Akze, and Peter. So you all can see in this way. So at this moment we are only creating four objects, but think you all want to create around like 50 or 100 objects. Are you all going to like create it like this? Like if you all create it in this way, it's going to consume one line for each of your object to initialize and create them. So how do we like create objects, or like let's say according to our coursework, they want us to create an object when a user buys a ticket, and that object is a ticket again. So when it comes to that, we had to store these objects in an array, right? Because by default, okay, this confuses you. Okay, let me keep it simple. First of all, let's try creating this and let's try printing this. And let's say if it works properly. I'm gonna say not John. If likewise, you all can call this for each of these method. So shit, sorry. So, so when I run this, it works perfectly and there's going to be zero errors. Yeah, it works. But think you want to create objects based on what user gives you, like user inputs, and you don't want to like have multiple statements. So the default way what you all would be doing is you all would be creating asking user input, assigning it here, and again asking input in the next line, assigning the values to here. For example, let me try creating two objects. I can't create all the objects that way. It's going to waste our time. So let's say I don't want to send the name what I type. I want to get it from the user and print it. So how do I do it? First of all, we have to get the input from the user, right? I'm going to say intern name, and then I could say string name equals scan. We had the scan object mentioned already. I'm going to say scan next line. So this is how you get a user input, right? So after getting this name variable, we can pass it as an argument to our constructor. So I can pass it like this. Likewise, we do the same thing for the age as well. So we say enter age, and then it's going to be integer age. It's going to be next int. So after doing this, we had to pass int. Oh, sorry, shit, age. So likewise, we would be doing the same thing for each of these objects, right? So for the first object, we had to do it again. For the second object, we had to repeat the same thing. So in this way, we can create it. It says person, And then for the second object, wait. I clicked enter twice. My bad. So 20. Um. Wait. Am I clicking enter twice? We can't have a class. We can't have a next line soon after our this method. So again, you'll have to use another way. For this, let's say this time I'll just so there's this thing in Java where you can't use next line method after using a next integer method. I think it won't work for the next as well, if I'm not wrong. So 20, oh, it works finally. John, then 22. So, oh shit. Here, the mistake. I'm making so many mistakes. Sorry, guys. Let's see. 20, 22. And yep, it works. So this is the normal way of doing it, right? But if I want to loop this and I want to reduce the number of lines, what y'all can do is use a loop, right? So simply we can use something like a for loop to do this. So for example, let's try to create a for loop which can run around 2 times. So we say integer I equals 0. So I'm just trying to create a for loop which runs 2 times. I'm gonna say when I is lesser than 2 I plus plus. So I'm gonna wrap it around. So by this way, what we're doing is it's gonna get the user input twice from us, and then it's going to create an object. So soon as we create an object, it's going to it creates an object, but then again, when it goes to the second iteration, it again create the object using the same reference name, right? Which means it's gonna override the object with the new values. So to avoid this, what can we do? Like y'all might be thinking how to do it, like how to create multiple objects using a loop without overriding and deleting the previous ones. So for that only we use something called a concept called object arrays, which means it's simply like you create the objects you all want. So let me come in this part. I know I'm teaching it in a hard way, but yeah, this is how it works. So let's try to create an object. So like in our previous way, so let's say we create this object like I'm giving some random values for this for now. Mm. So likewise, let's say we create 2 or 3 objects like this, and let's see. Oh shit, what's wrong? So now we have 3 objects, John, SUI, and A. So now I want to store them inside an array, and I want to see if it's possible. So to do that, first of all, we had to create an array. So how do we create an array? So in Java, to create an array, you have to say the data type, and then wait, let me comment this. You say the data type of the array, and then you'll use square brackets like this, and then you'll say the array name. So it's going to be array name. I'll say equal, and then you all can define the array items itself, or else you all can say the number of elements inside the array. So how do you say the number of elements inside the array? How to declare an array using the size? We say new, and again we say the data type of that array, data type of that array, and within brackets we say the size of the array. This is how we create, right? So if you all had forgot how to do it, let me create an integer array for your reference. So as the int array, let's say nums equals new int 5, 5. So we have created integer array which has 5 elements in it. So if I want, I can print it and show. For int I in nuts print. So when I run this, you all can see it will be printing 0000, since by default when you create an integer array, the values are going to be 0. So this is how you create an array. So this using the same way, we can also create an array using the data type called humans. So you all might be wondering what is this data type called humans. So humans is a class which we created, right? So when we defined what is a class, I told you all, let me show you this. In this class definition, I told you all, note a class is a non-primitive data type. So which means in data, in Java, it considers a class as a non-primitive data type. So you all might have heard this word non-primitive data type somewhere else also. So do you all remember what is string? So in Java, you all know what is string, right? A string data type. So is it primitive or non-primitive? Anyone? You all can type the answer in the chat also. Non-primitive. Yes. So what are the primitive data types? So you all know this is erase this off. Okay. So there's something called primitive and non-primitive. We have primitive data types as well as non-primitive primitive data types. So a string is a primitive data. A string is a non-primitive data type. And what are the primitive data types? So the examples for primitive data type is integer. We can say float, double. All the other stuffs are primitive data type, and the non-primitive data types are string and classes. So by default, all the classes are non-primitive data types. So how do you say, like, how do I say a string is a non-primitive data type? So if string is a non-primitive data type, then it could be having a separate class for itself, right? So let me try checking if it has something like that. So let me define a string variable here. Let me just initialize a string a variable, and when I go over this and control and click, you all can see it takes me to the class string.java. So this is also a separate Java file. That's why we say it's a non-primitive. It's not a primitive data type. But when it comes to integers and stuff, those are primitive data types. The reason why I say it is, have you all ever noticed when you all say string, the S is capital? And I had told you all when we create a class name, we normally mention the class name's first letter as capital. But when it comes to the other data types as integer or else float or any other data types, the first letter is simple. The reason is those are primitive and string is non-primitive. So a non-primitive data type is also a class. I mean, all the classes by default has a non-primitive data type. So here we are going to say our array is going to have elements which are in type of humans, which mean human classes. So inside our array, we are going to store human type objects inside it. So I say human, I create an object, and then I say I give some array name, and then say equals new human, and I can say the size like 4 maybe. In this case, let's create 3. So before saying this, I wanna show you all something else also. So what do you all think? What would be the output if I just try to print the reference? Like I create an object, and if I try to print this, what do you all think the output would be? So I'll run and show. Did I come in spot? Yes. So when I just run the reference, like when I try to print the reference, what happens is it prints some random address or like something which is not understandable by humans. So for this, we had to learn how it works in the backside. So by default, when you create in I think I had a slide for it. Give me a minute. No. So this is encapsulations. Give me a minute. Okay. So in Java, there are two memory allocations. You all might have heard it. Something called stack and heap. So if I'm to draw and show you all what is a stack and heap, I can just give you all a basic understanding. So a stack is something like a table which contains keys and value pairs, key and value pairs. So simply think like a key, it's going to store the key and value for it. And a heap is something like a bigger pool of it's like a bigger pool of memory. Okay. So simply in Java, when you create a object, when you create a variable, like if you say int I equals 5, what happens is, what happens in the backend is, it stores the values inside our stack. So it stores I equals 5. And when you say print I, it's going to come here, it's going to check the key, and it's going to print the value. But when it comes to an object doesn't object will be stored inside the heap memory, not inside the stack memory. So what happens is, so if we take the John object, we created a object using a reference called John, right? It would be stored inside our heap memory, not inside our stack memory. The only thing we would be having inside our stack memory is the reference name which we gave and some linking way. So we had to link this stack to this place, right? We had to point it out where our object is actually inside our heap, right? So it's going to contain the address, the memory address of our object. So in this case, let me take an example like 110.112. So let's consider this is our address for this object inside our heap memory, then it's going to store this. And that's why when you try to print the object reference, when you just try to print the object reference using a system out println, it prints you some random address like we saw here. It's printing human at 5B480CF9, which means it simply means the address of this object here. So, so now you all know what happens actually in the backend. So when you create an object, it gets stored inside your heap memory, and this variable is just a variable which stores the memory address of this actual object, which means you can assign this memory address to another variable also, right? I mean, why can't you? You can assign it, right? So I can create another variable called a. So the only one thing you all have to remember is both of these variables data type should be the same data type, or else it's gonna throw error. Same data type. So, if it has the same data type, then I can store the memory address in this thing also, right? It won't throw us the error. Can store the same memory address to this. So let's try doing this and let's see if it works. So here we created an object called John, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called human. So I told both should be in the same data type. In this case, the data type for John is human, which is a non-primitive data. Yeah, which is a non-primitive data type. So I'm going to say human, and I'm going to give a random variable name. So let me take it as test. So I'm going to say human test, and then what I'm going to do is test is equals to John. So at this point, what happens is inside our stack, it's going to do something like this. So here we have test, right? So we change it to test. So this is what happens. So if I print John and test, both of them are going to have the uh, same memory address. So let's try printing test. So you all can see when I run it, see both of them has the same memory address. So which means it's just assigning the address to the variable. So likewise, what we can do is we can take this memory address and store it inside an array, right? Which means it can be. I'll say why we do this later, but I'm just asking, can't we take this memory address and store it inside an array in so that later on we can store like multiple objects, like let's say have more objects here likewise. So if we take all of these memory address and if it store it inside an array, it's more organized, right? Or it's like more easy to access, right? And that's what's called as a object array. So your object array is going to store all the objects memory address, and once again using that memory address you all can access all the things inside your object. For example, so y'all might be asking if I can. So using John, you all know one thing. Using John dot print info, you all can access the John objects print info method. So what does print info does is just prints the info like name and age. So you all might have a doubt if we can do the same thing using the testing which we did, since both of them has the same address, which means they are pointing at the same object, right? So it should work, right? So let's see if it works or not. I'm gonna say print info, and when I run this, you all can say it prints the same thing again and again. So which means it works. So if I remove this one also, if I control F5, see it works. It says my name and my age. So likewise, what you all can do is you all can store this memory address inside a array, and later on you all can retrieve it, assign it to a variable, and do whatever you all want. So now let's try to put these three inside a array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a array with the same data types. So you all have to know if our objects are going to be with the data type called human, which is a non-primitive data type, then our array also should be in the same data type, because it has a simple logic like how string cannot be assigned to an integer and how integer cannot be assigned to a string. It's going to throw error, right? So the same way. So now we have created a array called people, which can store three elements inside it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say people. I'm going to say the people using the index. I'm just going to store these objects inside our array. So if I repeat it, people one equals people two equals it. Likewise, we can create object arrays. So this is how we create object arrays, and if you want, I can print these and show. So let me use a nested folder. Sorry, for each loop. I'm gonna say for each, and since the, so these are for each loop, and I don't think I had to teach you how to use a for each loop. So I'm going to say simply what it does is it takes each and every element from this array and it's going to print it. So 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 it's going to print three different addresses. So that's what I expect, because we are in our first iteration, it's going to point at the first index, which is John's memory address. In the second iteration, it's going to point at the second one. Third iteration, it's going to point at the third one. So see, all of our, like, all the object has a unique identity. All of them has different memory addresses. So this is how you store your objects inside an array. So using this method, can we use a for loop and reduce these number of lines? Like we had 3 lines, and if we are taking, like in the previous example, we were trying to get the input from the user and assign it to our parameters, right, inside our constructor. So after assigning it, can we assign the object we created to an array? Because if we don't assign, what happens is, let me show you what happens. So if I try to comment this, recommending this. So what we are doing here is we have created a for loop which runs twice, and that for loop is going to ask the name, age, and then it's creating an object with the reference called John. Okay. So after creating two objects, if I say John dot print info outside the okay, first of all, I had to initialize it. Um, so if I say John.print info, let's see what happens. I mentioned it here. Okay, this is just well, there are, let's get initialized here. Static. Okay, this works. But then again, modify static is not. Let me just try removing this and keeping inside. And let me print the info here itself. John. So when I do this, what happens is, because it's RG name, I'm gonna give a random name, random age, and then it prints info, and then okay, should be next or else. Oh. So random name, random age, next random name, and let's say 30. So what you can see here is we have two problems. One is this John, the reference name which we are giving, is being overridden. For example, during the first iteration, what happens is this is our heap memory, heap, and this is our stack. It creates an object called with the reference called John. Okay, creates the object with reference called John. So as soon as it creates a object, the memory address gets saved inside our stack, right? So it's key and value pair. It's gonna say John, and it would be having a unique memory address or location. So the name would be like something like unique, and the age is gonna be 20. That's what we get. This is during our first iteration. And in the second iteration, what happens is when it iterates the second time, it's going to ask the user input from the user, such as name and age, and it's using the same reference name and it creates a new object. So what happens is it's going to cancel off this object or like erases this memory address which is inside our stack, and then it creates a new object with the same reference name. But then again, this is going to have a different value inside it. So it's going to be 002 likewise. So in this case, we won't be able to retrieve the old memory address which we had. So what do we do? Like how do we store them? And that's why we use object arrays. So using this, control C, control V. So using this, what we can do is, soon as we create an object, we can say we want to append it inside our array. So how do I say it? So using indexes only, we can add something inside the array, right? So we have to say people using the index. So how do I say the index? So I don't want it to be constant. So during the first iteration, our index should be one, sorry, zero, and the second iteration it should be one, right? So does our so in our for loop we have a variable called I, and during the first iteration the value would be zero, and second iteration it would be one, right? So I can simply use that variable itself, okay, and it doesn't cause any harm. So after that, what I say is, so the value of the first element is going to be the object which we create here. So like we saw previously, what it does is, so let's say this is our array. So during the first iteration, it creates these objects, and then it stores a memory address here, so 001. And then during the second iteration, it creates a new object and then stores the value here. So likewise, we can do it. So how do I know if it works or not? So after doing that, I'm gonna print. I had a method, right? I'm going to print the item. So when I print it, we should be able to see two different addresses, and the rest would be null by default. So when I run this, you all can see task row, this thing as a 20, and then this thing as a 30. So now you can see we have created two different objects. How do I say two different objects? Look at this memory address. They had different memory address, right? So which means both of them are two different unique objects. So once we do this, if you want to retrieve and if you want to use that object, how do we do that? And again, it's so simple. All you had to do is, like we do in any other indexing part or assigning values from a array, what we do is we say what data type it's going to be. Since our array which we created is a non-primitive data type called human, which means our object also is going to be human data type, right? So what we say is human, and then we give a random variable name whatever we want, and then using the people's array we can just say the index and access it. So if I say 0, it's going to represent my first one. Likewise, if I say human k equals, okay, I made two mistakes here, equal. So in this part, by doing this, what I'm doing is, soon as we create two objects, right? So this object would be assigned to this variable called j later on in this process, and this object would be assigned to this thing. And later on, what we can do is we can say j.printinfo and k.printinfo. Let's see if this works. So first of all, let's run this. 20 and then 30. So see, it says it is the name which we gave here, 20, age is 20, and then the second one 30. So this is how you use a object array, and then this is how you create multiple objects and loop it and use them. And this part is how you retrieve and use that object in the normal way which we do. So if you're in context to our coursework, what we had to do is we had to create a ticket object when a user buys a seat. And after creating that object, what we do is we had to store it inside our ticket array. So ticket array is again, it's something like this. It's going to be a non-primitive data type array. So inside our ticket array, we are going to store the ticket objects which we create. So after storing them, later on, we have a method called ticket info, or else maybe in the cancel states, if we want to use them, we can use them. Like for example, in our cancel state, we had to print all the ticket information, right? So we loop through that array. We do something like this. So we say you can do this as well. So this is simply how your print ticket would be, show ticket information if I'm not wrong, would be like. So you could say human j equals to people, uh, people, I, oh, okay, I'm not even using index here, so let me, um, oh, I could simply say I as well, that also works here. And then I could say I dot, uh, oh, this, I could just call this like this, but then again, since we have a null, so let me remove this, let me make it 2. So if we do this, oh wait, let me do this part. So this is what we do inside, oh, make silly mistakes, sorry. So this is how you print, this is how you use a for loop, assign the objects which we created to a variable and print the info. So you'll be using this method inside our print information method or something. I think that's the name for that method in our Java coursework. So this is all about Java object arrays. Okay. So we looked what's an object array is. So to store multiple objects, we create a object array. So for example, let's say we have a student class. If you want to store multiple students' data, rather than having 4 different things, we could create a array and store these objects, right? So that's the easiest way. Okay. So the next part, exceptional handling or error handling. So error handling is something like pip. Okay. Um, so I'm going to comment all of this part. So what is exceptional handling? So that's what we have to understand first. So exception is an unexpected or error condition. So when we write a program, our program can generate many errors, right? Like no one is perfect in this world, so anyone who codes can make a mistake, and it's like so common. So error is known as exception in Java. So there are types of errors like compile errors, logical errors, and runtime errors. So let me show what are the compile errors. Let me show the difference. So compile errors are the errors which you do like syntax error. In simple way, compile errors are the syntax errors. For example, if I use a print statement without mentioning a semicolon at the end, it shows the error at the compiling process, right? So it's trying to compile and it shows the error. So that's why we call it as compile error. Okay. So compile errors are the errors which occur during the compile time. And then we have something called logical error. So logical errors are the hardest, one of the hardest errors to solve because you don't know what is the, you can't easily find them. For example, let's say we have a program which which is going to add two values and it's going to say the sum of those. So let's think of a typical program which has like 1,000 lines of code and it has some addition, like it has some complex additioning process. So let's say you're gonna enter 2 plus 2 and you receive the output as 5, which means the expected output is 4, but you receive 5, which means there's some logical error. It's not a compile error, but there's some logical error because your program runs perfectly and it shows the output as 5. So that is known as a logical error. Okay. And then we have something called runtime errors. So runtime errors are the errors which you get while running the program. So for example, the easiest error which we would be getting while running the program would be like, let's say we are getting a integer input from the user. We say scan.mixint, right? So when I compile this, it doesn't throw it. Let me say enter integer. So when I compile this, there's no error. Okay, it runs perfectly. But when I, let's say, so at the first case, I'm just going to type an integer so that it doesn't throw any error. But then again, when I rerun this program, and if I type a string, then it throws an error. So this is known as a runtime error. So which means this error occurs during the runtime. So another example for runtime error would be when you're trying to, let's say, you create your program which has a text file. Okay, so you're reading a data from a text file. So at this point, you'll be saying where your text file is, right? You'll be giving the path of that text file. So now what you do is you copy your program and you're trying to run it on a different machine. So when you run it on a different machine, the the path of that file will be changing, right? It's not going to be user/argzen. It would be something else. The path would be different. So when that happens, it's going to throw you an error. So it's also known as a runtime error. So there are three types of errors in Java. I mean, no, not in Java, in any programming languages, which is logical error, runtime error, and compile error. So you all have to know it. So in Java, we have two basic classes for errors. So one is known as error and exception. So I don't think these are in our lecture slides, but it's important to know about this. So both of these error types or like both of these classes, so once again, since Java is a WOP language, which is object oriented language, everything is in form of objects and classes, which means this error file or whatever this error throwing is also written as a class file. So if you all want to see it, I can show you all later on. So there's two main error classes, which is known as error.java and exception.java. So these are built-in class files, which is done by Java people, the people who build Java. So both of them are descendants of throwable class. So there is a parent class for it known as throwable. Just it's simply it's like a inheriting throwable class. So these things y'all don't have to know, like y'all don't have to memorize it, but just know it because not now, but in your second year y'all might be using it. Okay. So error class represents more serious errors that can be caused in your program. For example, so at the moment we won't be coming through this error, but when you all are building a complex program, there might be chances where you all can encounter this error. So example for error class type error is when you don't have enough memory to execute a program. Sorry. I think it's a mistake. So example for that would be when you don't have enough memory to run your or execute your program, then it's going to throw you an error, and it's like a more serious error, and you had to do something to run your program. For example, if you want to overcome that error, you might have to add some additional memory to handle your program. So those are like more serious error. So that's known as a error class type error. Okay. And then we have the basic error, which is known as exceptional class errors. So exceptional class errors are less serious error that arises while the program is running, and from which the program can recover. So you all know, when it comes to error class type errors, your program can't recover unless you all upgrade something. For example, if it says insufficient memory, you all had to allocate more memory for the program to run, right? So it requires some sort of process. But in this thing, it's just because of your runtime problems, which is like runtime errors. So in our case, we'll be mostly using exceptional class. Okay, so that's why we call it exceptional handling what uh, in our way. So like I told y'all, both of these classes has a parent class called throwable class, and these are like child classes. So these child classes has different types of errors. So in Python we had something like type error, value error, likewise, right? So likewise in Java we had something like IO exception, SQL. Oh, okay, SQL we won't be doing it. Uh, let's think about this one: arithmetic, null pointer exception. Um, the easiest one would be zero division exception. Those type of stuff. So for this part, y'all don't have to look at this, but I just gave y'all an idea what is error class and exception class. Okay, so let's see how to use try and catch. So first of all, y'all have to know where to use a try and catch block. So we won't be using try and catch for everything because we don't have to use it. Okay, let me give an example. So let's say you have a child, so you have your cousin or someone, you're holding his hand, and think about two different scenarios. So the first scenario is you're holding the child's hand when you're inside your home, and the second scenario is you're holding that child's hand when you're in a road or else in the middle of the road. Okay, so let's think about the first situation where the child takes his hands off and he starts to run. So when the child is inside the home, it's not a problem, right? He's not going to like, nothing would happen since it's inside the home. So you don't have to like hold him or you don't have to stop him. But when it comes to a road or else a main road or something, you can't let the child run here and there. I mean, it's risky, right? So those things has to be avoided, and we had to like hold it, or we had to like do something, right? So these are two situations, right? Likewise, in Java also, in our programming also, we have two situations or two statements, which is known as normal statements, normal statements, statements, and we have something called critical statements. So normal statements are the statements which won't throw an error, and critical statements are the statements which can possibly throw an exceptional. So I'll give you all some examples for normal statements. So when you all create a variable, like when I say int I, is there any possibilities to throw an error? Like I'm just initializing a variable. Do you think like it can throw error, or if I say int I equals 0, do you think it can throw error? No, right? But if I say something like this, for example, for a critical statement, if I say int sum equals 19 divided by I. So at this point, it won't be throwing error. So let me solve. Sum. Oh wait, it will be throwing error at this point. Let me take this too. So at this point, it won't be throwing an error because 19 divided by 2 is going to be 9. But soon as I change this value to 0, see, this is not the problem, but this becomes a problem. It highlights here as well. It says division by 0, which means when we run this code, this statement is going to throw you an error, and the error is arithmetic error. So this is known as a critical statement, and we have to use a except error handling for these statements. Like we had to use the error handling for our critical statements. So how do we use error handling? So simply we have two things. Like try, we had I don't remember. Try and what did we have in Python? Try and error. Wait, try and catch. No, that's wait. Yeah. So in Python we had something like try and except blocks, right? Likewise, in Java we have try, which is going to take our critical statement, and then we have catch. It's not except. In Python it's used to be except, but here we say catch. And inside catch, I'll be explaining you all these things. For now, exception as b, and then we say so some error, some error occurred. So I say it like this. So what happens here is now it won't be throwing this ugly line, but um, wait, let me put this. Z, X. So let me move it inside this. Oh shit, it's not this block. Okay, let me move it inside this and run it. So now it doesn't throw these red lines, rather it would be saying this thing. So why do we have this try and except block? So the reason why we have it is, so let's say in our previous method, let me copy this. Oh shit. So in the previous way, when we didn't have any try and block error, let's say after doing this calculation, we just want to print something like by. So there's no way it's going to throw error in this statement. This is a normal statement, right? It's not a critical statement. So if I run this, even though the okay, so so when there's no error, it works properly. But when there's an arithmetic error, it doesn't goes to the next line. Your program exits from that point, but we don't want it to happen. So that's why we use something like error handling. So that's the reason why we use error handling. So using error handling, what we can do is we can put our critical statements inside our try block and the normal statements outside. So simply I can say so, but so now you can see, even though there's an error, it doesn't exit soon after it. It goes to the next line and repeats the other tasks which are not causing the error. So this is how you handle errors. And again, in this part, in catch part, we have something called exception if. So exception is the error type. So you all can also specifically mention if it's a arithmetic or else an input mismatch or something like that. Or else you all can simply say exception. So exception is a class which would be catching all the errors. So when I control and click on this, you all can see I told you all exception is a Java class file which is a Java class file. So you all can see it has so many methods and stuffs. Likewise, error. So if I change it to error also, error is also a class file. So if I control and click on it, you all can see it. So mainly we only dealing with exceptional. Okay. So if you all generally wanna just say whatever the error and you all just wanna print some error occur, then you all can use it. Or else if you all wanna specifically say what error has occurred, then we have so many error types, right? You all can just go Google and find the or else you all can see here itself. Here we have the runtime errors like arithmetic error. So it's known as arithmetic exception. And if we give a mismatching input, for example, we are asking a integer input, and if you provide a string input, it would be throwing an error called input mismatch. So which means it belongs to input mismatch class. So likewise, we had different error types. So you can specify that also. So I can say arithmetic. So when I type arithmetic itself, it shows me arithmetic exception. So I can click on it and press E. So it would be catching only the arithmetic exception. So in our try block, simply like in Python, we can have multiple except blocks. So after catching, so this part will be only catching the arithmetic errors, okay? And then we can have another error block which would be catching all the other errors which are not arithmetic errors. So let me say exception. So I'm going to say exception E. So afterwards I say sort say some error occurred. So here I can say some arithmetic. So I could say something like this. So see, when I run this, for now we only have arithmetic errors, right? That's why it says arithmetic errors occurred. But let me change this and let me try to give some other errors. So rather than arithmetic error, which is like, let me define a print statement without this semicolon in the, oh, it's going to be critical statements. It's going to give a this thing runtime error, right? Shit. So wait, let me give another error like, let me try to assign a integer value to a string. Check. M equals let it scan. So it runs and it's asking for an integer input. But if I enter a string, what happens is it throws an error called input mismatch, which means it goes to this block. Since we didn't say input mismatch as a separate block, it goes to the parent block, which is known as exception E. So when I enter this, you all can see some error of it. It doesn't say some arithmetic, it just says some error. So if you want me to print the error message also, I could simply say E. So when I run this, so here you all can see it says input mismatch exception. So again, I can have another catch block to catch that specific error, and that works perfectly. Let's say input mismatch exception. Maybe I could say so enter proper input like this. So this works. I enter something, enter the proper input. So yeah, that's how it works. And you'll have to know one thing: if you'll have multiple catch blocks, and if you're going to have an exception, exception class at the exception class handling, that class or else that catch block should be at the end. Y'all can't place this in the first. If y'all do that, what happens is it throws all error, or it can't simply run. The reason is I told y'all here. So if I come here, this exception is like a parent, and these ones are like a children. So if you say you're going to catch the parent itself, it doesn't has to go to the below blocks, right? Because if you catch the parent and if you handle the error, then it doesn't have to check for these ones, right? That's why it throws error. So if you all want to specifically catch some error, then say them first and then say the general term like exception. So if I'll see, I say something like E, right, space E. So simply it's like creating an object of this class and then using it. So if I try to explain it in technical terms, it's going to be like a lecture. So simply try to memorize it. So you say the error type and give a space, and you just give some variable name or just some letter. Okay, that's how it's done. So this is how you do error handling in Java. Okay. So the next part is Sorry. So the next part is file handling. So you all know the data items when we run our Java program and soon as it ends, we won't be able to access the variable values or whatever we did during that program, right? What I mean is, soon as the program ends, you all can't access the previous value or like the last time when the program ran, the values which we were assigned to the variables, you all can't access them, right? The reason is it is stored as temporary. So in computers, we have something called volatile and non-volatile memories. I think you all know about it. So a volatile storage is a temporary storage, and it stores the variables or in context to our Java programming, when we create a variable, it stores the values as in terms of volatile memory, which means those variables values would be lost when your computer loses the power. For example, for volatile memory is random access, your RAM. So you all know when you run a so when you all run your JVM, it runs on your RAM, which is which is a volatile memory. So which means soon as the power goes, all of the stuff you did here would be erased off. Okay, so it's like a temporary storage within your computer, and when you write a Java program that stores a value in a variable, you're using a RAM. So what can you do if you want to store the variables, not just for that instance, but you want to access it even if your computer loses the power and if you turn it in the next time, or if you run the program after closing the program, what you can do, or else what are the possible ways to store the values is by storing them in a text file or else a database file. So those are the non-volatile storage, or like it's simply like a permanent storage. So when you store it in a permanent storage, the variables or the values won't be lost even though your computer loses the power. So you all can read this. I just gave an example. In context to programming, there are two main types of non-volatile storage mediums that we would be using in Java would be text files and databases. For now, we don't use databases, but we had to know how to use a text file. So we're gonna see how to use a text file. So to use file handling, first of all, you all have to import a class called file writer. So we say import, just like you import scanner, you say java.io, and then you can type file writer. So this is the package which you all have to install, sorry, import. So soon as you all import it, you all can create your file. I'm gonna do this. So there's something important. So when it comes to Java, I have told you when you all access a file or else when you all are playing around with the file, that is like one of the easiest way which could throw you a runtime error. So what Java does is it asks the programmers to use it asks the programmers to create the file inside a try block, or else it's not going to allow you. So I'll show you. So how do we create a file? So simply to create a file, we had to create an object of file writer. So how do we create an object of file writer? We say file writer, which is the class. We give a reference. So in my reference, I'm gonna say my file, my file equals new file writer. So inside the parenthesis, we can say the file name. So in this case, I'm gonna say test.txt. Then you could do like this. So now you all can see through the error. The error is it says unhandled exception, which means it's asking us to use a error handling for this method. So okay, there's another easy way to use error handling. So this is also something we could do. So if you all want to use a error handling for your critical statement, you all just have to highlight or select that statement And when you select, soon as you select in our IntelliJ, it shows this option like over here. And when you go to surround, you can find this thing called try and catch, and you'll simply have to click it. So this is how you use try and catch in simple terms. Okay, you all don't have to code each and every block. You can use easy ways. Okay, but before that, you all had to know how it works or how it actually runs. Okay, so now it's possible. So now it doesn't throw an error. So know one thing, whenever you're creating a file writer object, it should be inside a try block. Okay, and afterwards, so when I run this program, so you all had to know one thing. So when we open a file, again we had to close it. So I say my file dot close. Okay, and then I'm going to run this program, and I'm going to see if I can see the file inside our folder. So this is our folder, and here you all can see, right, here it shows test.txt. So uh, wait a minute. So can you all see here it says text.txt, that is our text file. So that's the name which we gave, right? So that's the file which we created. Okay, uh, so yeah, that's how you create a text file here. Okay, and now we had to know how to write data inside this test file. So at this moment, there's nothing inside this test file. Okay. So to write data, we have a method which is a method of this class called file writer. So in this file writer class, I mean file writer.java, they have a method called write, and that method is going to write the data whatever we say. So how do I access that method? First of all, I had to say my reference name of the object. So the reference name here is my file, right? That is the file name for my file. So I say my file dot write. So when I say this, we can so whatever we say inside the parentheses will be written inside our text file. So I can say hello world. So let me run this, and then let me open our file. So the program runs, it sits, and when you check, you can see this. And you all have to know one thing. So if we are going to use the same file name, and if we are gonna write, if the file already exists in the same directory, your program is gonna overwrite the file with the new context. Okay. So which means if I say previously it has some text called hello world, and now I say hello world exit. So when I run this, it's gonna overwrite it, and we would be only seeing hello world exit inside this. So see, it's overwriting it. So the next thing you all have to know is if you all want to write something in the next line, you all have to use the same rules like next line methods and stuff. So that's all. That's mainly what you'll have to do. So yeah, that's all about file handling. So you'll have to know three things. So how do you create a file is using by creating an object of that file, and inside the constructor you all have to say the file name with the extension, and that's how we all create the file. And in the second line you all can write or perform whatever the thing you all want, and at the end it's compulsory to close the file which you all open, or else it's going to throw you an error again. And another thing is, the third thing is, the entire thing should be inside a try and catch block. The reason is all of these are critical statements, which means these can possibly throw an error. So that's all about file handling as well. Okay, let me say something else also. So let's say in our program, they say in our coursework, they ask us to create files for each and every ticket which has been sold. Which means soon as a user buys a ticket, they want us to create a file. For example, if a user buys a ticket in A5, they want us to create a text file such as A5 txt. And let's say in the next iteration user buys a ticket in a6, then we had to create another file with a6txt. So how do we change this name? How do we make it like dynamic? So for that we can simply do this, concatenate and send the values. So let me show you all the example. I'm going to say string row. So I can say a and some integer seat equals 14 maybe. So here what I'm going to do is, rather than saying everything within the same text, I'm going to concatenate and say it. So what I say is row plus c plus dot txt. So this is our extension for file name, and a14 should be the file name, right? And this is the extension. So that's how you do it. So when you do this and run it, so it's going to create a file with a14.txt. So to change this value, you all had to do it using your class ticket class. So in ticket class, whenever user in like when a user buys a seat, you will be having the row letter and the seat number, right? So you all just pass it and create the file. That's all. So that's how simple this is. So I think I covered everything. Do you all have any doubts in any parts? Any doubts or else we can find out. I can share the presentation slide. Uh, that's all about object classes, error handling and file handling. If you all have any problems with your codes, you all can share it in the group and we'll be helping you all with the errors. Or if you all don't understand anything, you all can text us and we can help you. So that's all about it, and yeah, thank you for joining. If you all have any doubts, you all can let me know in the group.